In 1948, a book was published that sparked the sexual revolution. Unnoticed within it were the details of the sexual abuse of several hundred children. Who were these children? Who were their abusers? And how did the world's most famous sex scientist come to use the details of these sexual assaults as evidence of children's sexuality? Professor Alfred Kinsey was the father of the sexual revolution. From 1948 to 1956, he traveled the world, advising governments how to modernize antiquated sex laws. From Britain, where he advised the Wolfenden Committee on Homosexuality, to Europe and America, his advice was key to updating sexual attitudes. In 1948, Kinsey published the first scientific study of what people do in bed. Sexual behavior in the human male took the world by storm.
When the book came out, it simply hit America. It was compared to the atom bomb. People were rushing out to buy it. It sold something like 300,000 copies for a book almost twice as expensive as the ordinary book, and certainly 5 times as fat. All the papers had it either in the front pages or very, very big in the middle pages. All the magazines, Life, Time, had 6 or 7 page spreads about him.
Before Kinsey, America had a schizophrenic attitude to sex. No matter what they did in private, in public, its citizens adhered to a strict moral code.
The only sex that is sanctioned by society and its legal strictures in the 20s and 30s is sex between people who are married. And even then, there's some interesting and arcane laws about even husbands and wives. One of my favorites from Northwood, Arkansas, that a man and woman, even if they're married, mustn't laugh while they're having sex, because, that's sex is serious business.
Oh, the sexual climate in those days was, well, to put it gently, repressive. Everything was illegal except wet dreams. And so, well, if you had premarital intercourse, that was labeled fornication. If you had extramarital intercourse, that was adultery. Of course, homosexuality was taboo completely. So was animal contact. If you tried petting, you had to be very careful of the age of your partner, or you would be contributing to the delinquency of a minor. You also had to watch your techniques. If there was any mouth-genital contact, by definition, that was sodomy. Literally, as Kinsey once said, if all the sex laws were rigidly enforced, about 90% of the males would be felons.
Kinsey's book challenged most known views on sexual behavior. From masturbation to adultery, homosexuality to bestiality, Kinsey's patient research appeared to reveal the reality of America's sex life.
We took sex, you might say, out of the closet. We made it possible to discuss sexual matters in the home, in the office, in schools, and even in the media. We sort of broke the taboos.
The research was based on the biggest survey of sexual attitudes and behavior ever undertaken. Kinsey invented a highly detailed, confidential questionnaire. His researchers had to learn the complicated code which encrypted both questions and answers. Paul Gebhard was a senior member of the team.
Frankly, it was a damnable thing to memorize, and Kinsey forced us to memorize it. He wouldn't let us keep a little guide or cheat sheet or something. We had to memorize it verbally. It was a sheet of paper divided up into columns and lines. And each column dealt with one subject. For example, one column dealt with the frequency of intercourse in marriage. Another column dealt with masturbation. Another column dealt with psychological responses to sexual stimuli, etc.
Another thing he did was always to assume that people had done everything. It was never, have you had sex with a pig? It was, when was the first time you had sex with a pig? And as one of his interviewees said, if you hadn't had sex with a pig, you were fine, but if you had, he'd got you.
He was in the market for everything. His interview system was so flexible that if you happened to surprise him with something, turned out that you were a hair fetishist or something like that, he would stop and go off on that tangent and explore it to the nth degree.
But there was a dark side to the research. One chapter in the book dealt with the previously unresearched subject of child sexuality. It's little known that to get this information, Kinsey cultivated relationships with habitual child molesters. These pedophiles would provide him with accounts of their abuse of children and with their own interpretations of children's sexual development.
At the beginning of his research, Kinsey saw pedophilia as really beyond the pale. As he collected more and more data, and as he, again, hoped to promote more and more tolerance, he has a hard time maintaining moral boundaries.
In June 1944, Alfred Kinsey left Indiana on an 1,800-mile trek across the southwestern United States. He was going to a clandestine meeting with a man who was to become his prime source of information about child sexuality.
This individual was, I suppose you might say, his interest in sex was his main hobby in life. Anything was a sexual object for him. He was interested in having sex with men, women, and children and animals. And he just was curious to see what would happen.
His first sexual contact was overt intercourse with his grandmother. He had looked up his family tree. There were I forget how many, 33 or 38 members. He had had almost all of them. He had had intercourse with hundreds upon hundreds of males and females of every conceivable age. My memory is that it's exceeded 600 for both boys and girls, and we haven't yet got to maturity.
The man was a U.S. government land examiner called Rex King. To protect him, Kinsey gave him the code name Mr. Green. His job took him across Arizona and New Mexico, trips he used to prey on children. He molested at least 800 boys and girls, recording the details in explicit handwritten diaries. Kinsey was told about Green by his own mentor in sex research, Dr. Robert Dickinson. Dickinson had collaborated with the pedophile for several years and taught him how to record his child abuse in scientific detail.
He told him how to measure things and time things, and encouraged him to, he knew he was going to do his ordinary behavior anyway. Dickinson couldn't have stopped him from being a pedophile. But he said, at least you ought to, do something scientific about it, so it won't be just your jollies, it'll be something worthwhile to science. So he gave him some training by letter and correspondence.
Experimented with baby. Penis 1.7 inches by 3 inches. Stiff immediately. Throbs in 3.5 minutes.
Green's diaries were a highly incriminating record of 20 years of sexual abuse. But Kinsey was tantalized by the prospect of so much unique data.
I congratulate you on the research spirit which has led you to collect data over these many years. Everything that you've accumulated must find its way into scientific channels.
Kinsey worshipped data. Anyone who could contribute to his aggregate data had a very high place in his pantheon of heroes. And when Kinsey learned about this material, he saw it as a gold mine, as a scientific gold mine that would provide information in an area about which science knew very, very little.
Kinsey met Green at a secret location in Arizona. Because of the illegal nature of their contents, Green had buried many of his diaries in the desert. Kinsey persuaded him to retrieve them and pass them on to him. Green had been a predatory child molester for more than 20 years. So why did Kinsey agree to work with him? Clarence Tripp was one of Kinsey's closest associates. Even today, he defends Kinsey's involvement with the pedophile.
Green was actually extremely conservative in all kinds of ways, and we know that for sure, because he had, you can get into trouble in a flash if you have any kind of even tickling, any kind of sexual contact whatsoever with the child, because all you need is one whimper out of the child. You don't even need a formal charge to put you in the jailhouse. Well, here's this man with hundreds of contacts. There was never a charge against him. He was never arrested for anything. All the children thought he was wonderful. All the mothers thought he was wonderful. There are two, I suppose, lest you get contradicted, there are two instances in which a young boy or girl, I guess it was, I don't remember, didn't complain. They agreed to the sexual contact, but then they found it very painful and yelled out when it actually took place. This was because they were very young and had small genitalia, and Green was a grown man with enormous genitalia, and there was a fit problem.
For the next 3 years, Kinsey corresponded regularly with Green. In 1948, he would publish large sections of Green's diaries in his first revolutionary book on human sexuality. But rather than presenting them as the claims of a self-confessed child abuser, Kinsey put them forward as the first ever scientific proof that children were sexual beings from birth. When, in 1948, Alfred Kinsey's Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male became an instant bestseller, no one seemed to notice the contents of Chapter 5. In it, Kinsey reproduced sections of the paedophile diaries he had received from Mr. Green. First, and with no independent corroboration, he published verbatim Green's detailed descriptions of what the paedophile claimed were orgasms experienced by the hundreds of children he had abused.
Extreme tension with violent convulsion, often involving the sudden heaving and jerking of the whole body, groaning, sobbing, or more violent cries, sometimes with an abundance of tears, especially among younger children.
If you read those words, what he's talking about is kids who are screaming, kids who are protesting in every way they can the fact that their bodies, that their persons are being violated. The individual in question, I think, harmed in serious ways a large number of young people.